It always takes courage to speak up against injustice, and takes that much more courage to be the first one to speak up. And Jian Li here, a student representative, is such a person. He filed an individual complaint against Princeton University in 2006 for its discriminatory admission practice. Let's invite Jian Li to give us a talk.
Thank you to Yukong and the Asian American Coalition for Education for inviting me here. Thank you to the Congressman for his consistent support. I'm honored to have the opportunity to address you today. In the Supreme Court case Plessy v. Ferguson, Justice Harlan declared, "Our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. In respect of civil rights, all citizens are equal before the law." Thurgood Marshall, who argued against segregation in Brown v. Board of Ed, stated, "Classifications and distinctions based on race or color have no moral or legal validity in our society. They are contrary to our Constitution and laws." In the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it states, "No person in the U.S. shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." And yet, Americans of Asian descent face pervasive discrimination at our elite universities due to admissions policies which favor students of one race over another, which violate the constitutional guarantees of equal protection before the laws, which contradict both the letter and the spirit of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. About 10 years ago, I was approaching my high school graduation. Like many high schoolers, I spent a lot of time anxiously contemplating my chances of getting into college. And by then, I had become aware of the higher hurdles that students like me would face in order to matriculate at a selective university. I'd read a book, The Price of Admission, by Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Golden. Referring to the well-known history of Ivy League discrimination against Jews in the early 20th century, he wrote, "Asian Americans are the new Jews, inheriting the mantle of the most disenfranchised group in college admissions." In a particularly frank moment in the book, MIT's Dean of Admissions, Marilee Jones, brazenly stereotyped Korean students as, quote, "textureless math grinds." As a student with a passionate interest in mathematics, that did not really sit well with me. Toward the end of my junior year of high school, Princeton University published a press release highlighting some research Princeton sociologists had done on college admissions. According to this research, which was based on a quantitative analysis of confidential admissions data, Asian Americans had to score up to hundreds of SAT points higher than other students in order to have the same chance of being admitted. When I heard this, I was flabbergasted. Obviously, discrimination is a fact of life and something which will always exist in some form. But it blew my mind that institutional discrimination at our elite universities could persist in the 21st century. I was outraged that in the act of applying to college, I would be held to a higher standard because of my ethnicity. That in effect, Princeton University would treat me as a second-class citizen in my own country. I expected others to share my outrage. Princeton was not just committing discrimination, it was admitting to it in a press release. I waited for someone, either an Asian American organization or the ACLU, to condemn this state of affairs. But actually, nothing happened. So in the summer of 2006, I wrote up a complaint and submitted it to the Office for Civil Rights. That was over 10 years ago. 10 years later, the bureaucrats at the OCR have finally come back with a decision. After all this time, they've ruled in favor of Princeton. Was it because they concluded that Princeton doesn't use race in admissions? Actually, quite the opposite. The OCR wrote, "Princeton concedes that it does consider the race and national origin of applicants for admission, but that these are only two of the many factors that the university may consider." Princeton was let off the hook because the OCR had determined that its racial preferences were instituted in a, quote, "narrowly tailored manner." What does that mean? As an example, Princeton did not have separate admissions tracks for each race and had refrained from circulating fixed racial quotas for admissions officers to target. But the truly relevant analysis, a statistical test of whether an Asian American student would have worse odds of being admitted than a similarly qualified non-Asian student, was never performed by these investigators. And in fact, whenever such an analysis has been done, it has pointed strongly toward the existence of Asian quotas. So 10 years later, the Office for Civil Rights has demonstrated itself unable to objectively adjudicate our claims. 10 years later, we still live in a country where elite gatekeepers discriminate against us with impunity, and our government looks the other way. 10 years later, the institutions which we were taught to trust as the guarantors of our civil rights as Americans have failed to live up to their promise. And yet, in the last 10 years, something has changed. When I filed my complaint 10 years ago, I felt like a voice in the wilderness. The public reaction to my claims was one of skepticism rather than solidarity. Not a single advocacy organization came to my side. But today, the Asian American community has finally started to unite behind this cause. More than 100 Asian American organizations have stepped up in defense of civil rights. I have a message to every single Asian American student in the country who is applying to college. Your civil rights are being violated, and you must speak up in defense of them. If you've suffered discrimination, you have the option to file a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights. Let your voice be heard. And not only through formal means, but also by simply letting it be known in your schools and your communities, in the press and on social media, that university discrimination is pervasive and that does not sit well with you. Together, we will fight to ensure that universities can no longer treat us as second-class citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jian Li, for speaking up. Your experience certainly represents that of many Asian American applicants to Ivy League colleges who are turned down because of the racial category they're in.